We're now, the numbers have risen up to a considerable level that we thought would and anticipated would be. Ruth Johnson, Head of Policy for Government of Jersey, joins us. Ruth, thank you for being there. Let's just start off by saying stage 7. Is this the very last stage, the stage that this particular sector and this industry have been waiting for some time? This is the final piece, is it not?
This is the final piece of the jigsaw. So when the Reconnection roadmap was published, there were 7 stages to it, and in stage 7, we were looking to reconnect the activities which present the highest risk. And those include the full reconnection of nightclubs, larger events and gatherings, and also no restrictions on the numbers of people gathering in homes and gardens. So presume that the vaccination program still continues to roll, presuming that we don't see any significant increases in transmission of COVID on Ireland. This is kind of the last key stage of reconnection in the island. There will be, or it's anticipated that there will be some small legal controls that continue beyond the 14th of June. So for example, it is possible that masks may be required in some settings, such as hospitals and close contact services. We're still working out the detail of that at the moment. And also there will be legal requirements that continue to be placed on certain sectors to gather contact details. So for example, in restaurants, cafes, and also in nightclubs and in large events as well. But beyond those small legal controls and the ongoing guidance, which is about being sensible to try to ensure that we don't get those peaks in transmission, hopefully this is it.
I think from the outset, because there is guidance, and I noticed that the guidance for nightclubs does say that the nature of the business, it states that the nature of this business, indoors, close contact between people, loud music, higher levels of alcohol consumption, all of those, and this is almost the caveat before we start saying all the good news. That's the bad news of why this particular sector has been held back as long as it has.
Yeah, absolutely. It is just the case that the nightclub is almost the ultimate litmus test of risk when it comes to COVID transmission. And we know from other jurisdictions that where there have been spikes, there is some evidence that those spikes have occurred as a result of nightclubs being reopened. So this is the reason why government has controlled the nightclub environment in particular until the last moment, until the point that actually we really do feel confident that we can move forward.
It doesn't go. It's worth mentioning as well that the conversations that Chamber have had with government, there is a huge amount of empathy and sympathy with this industry to try and get it open as soon as possible. Are we fixed on the 14th of June? There is no movement on that. This is a lead time leading up to that time. It's not going to open earlier.
Yeah, no, it won't open earlier, but it is certainly the intention of the competent authority ministers to reconnect on the 14th of June as advertised. Now, you will expect me to say that as with everything, there is always the potential for last minute changes, because you will have seen the news yesterday about the confirmation of the variant that originated in India being on the island. But at this point in time, as it stands, it's absolutely the intention of competent authority ministers to reconnect nightclubs and large events on the 14th.
Okay, all right. JP was just asking that one and just saying, could the date come forward or could it go backwards? Now, it's not going to go forward, we know that, and you've just given the caveats in case it went backwards. So I think we've answered that one. And so we're working towards the 14th of June. What happens between now and the 14th?
So what's going to happen between now and the 14th is we've issued some draft guidance, and we would like feedback on that guidance in order for us to be in a place to formally issue it just ahead of the 14th. And we're having conversations, for those people who are organisers of larger events that require the bailiffs panel permission. We're in a dialogue about the bailiffs panel with the bailiffs panel, about that guidance, about what the bailiffs panel should be looking like in terms of kind of reasonable and sensible measures to control COVID. And that is what's going to happen between now and the 14th. And there will be amendments to the legislation which will remove some of the existing controls. So, for example, at the moment, nightclubs can only open as food and drink premises. That's going to change on the 14th legally, so they can open for all purposes. So that's kind of, that we're doing the knitting in the background to reopen on the 14th.
Okay. There's lots for us to talk about within the next 50 odd minutes, and questions will come in the Q&A boxes where you can put them in there. Warren, as I expected, thank you very much indeed for sending us in a question or two, or a comment, in fact. And this has been raised by a couple of people. Liverpool recently held a COVID pilot event with 6,000 people, and they had no impact on the virus spread, having done so. Is there an upper limit on numbers? You mentioned the bailiffs panel and larger events. Have we got a ceiling on how many people we can have at an event at this time? Because some of the big events are obviously keen to have more than, say, 1,000 people.
Yeah. No, there's no limit on numbers in law. So the only legal constraints there will be on events is that they must take contact details. And be able to provide contact details in case we require them for contact tracing purposes. And that's it in terms of the law. Obviously, there is guidance, and the guidance is there to support nightclub owners and organisers of events to take sensible measures to stop outbreaks. And the reason why we want to stop outbreaks is we don't want to get to the point whereby we have to reimpose all the legal controls and the limits on numbers of people that we've just removed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, this is really important, because we've had questions already saying, why have we got limits? Why are we? And actually, what you're saying is there are no limits.
There's no limits. There's no limits. I mean, the bailiffs panel will make the decisions that it always makes, which is around the health and safety of an event. But those any controls imposed by the bailiffs panel will relate to general health and safety controls. There are no legal limits that relate to COVID and COVID transmission.
Okay, thank you for clearing that up. I think that's important for some people who are watching this to understand. Interestingly, I mean, just what you mentioned there about contact details, the draft guidance at the moment doesn't state the best practice on how to seek individual personal details. There are various methods of doing it. Some are better than others. What do you recommend? If you've got an event where, whether it's 50 people or 5,000, if you're going to have to collect data, there are. I mean, we might talk to the Office of the Data Information Commissioner about this as well. But just in terms of collecting data, are there better methods?
Well, it does partly depend on the number of people that are attending. So, if it's a relatively small event, then obviously you can use the technology that's used in cafes and restaurants, where you simply register using your mobile phone where you come in. Or if people don't have smartphones, it's kind of a piece of paper and writing down contact details. But obviously for mass events, then that becomes particularly problematic. And of course, you've got opportunities through your ticketing and your sales of tickets to be able to gather people's contact details. But what you must make sure that you do is when people provide contact details, you make sure that they are aware that those contact details may be provided for contact tracing purposes. So you've got to get your privacy notices correct. And if you need advice and you want to talk to people about the contacting of details, we're more than happy to talk to you about best methods and how to do that to make sure that you stay on the right side of the law.
Okay, and contact details, they're just needed for indoor nightclub events, or are they needed for all events?
No, contact details will be needed for all events, and contact details will continue to be needed in the locations that they're already required. So for example, in restaurants and cafes and gyms, contact details are the one ongoing control, kind of more universal control, with the exception of masks in certain places, that we will be retaining, because absolutely fundamental to the ongoing control of potential transmission in the island is our ability to track and trace people who may have been in contact with others with COVID. So contact details and the legal requirements around them will continue and are probably likely to be in place for quite a time yet.
Yeah, I think the contact details is an area which this sector, particularly the events sector, are probably more concerned about than anything else. I mean, we've had comments already saying, in essence, this sounds fine, but in reality, this is going to be quite a difficult thing for them to do. So I don't think I think it's horses for courses, isn't it? That one size doesn't fit all in this, but you know, it's an area which if there aren't any other restrictions, this is the one thing that has to remain, the contact details. Am I right in reading that's what you're saying about this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's it. So contact details remain in law, and there is a legal duty based on events organisers and on nightclub owners to collect contact details.
Whilst we're talking about legal duty, you mentioned guidance earlier on and recommendations, which is not legal in law. The draft guidance that we're looking through, and we'll try and get through some of it in more detail, does recommend that nightclubs operate at a recommended or a guidance of 50% of their capacity. That's just guidance, isn't it?
Yes, it is indeed. So the draft guidance that you will see that has come out suggests a whole range of measures that we would like nightclubs and event organisers to consider in reopening. So those measures include things from maximising ventilation wherever possible, because fresh air is absolutely fundamental to the control of COVID within indoor environments. The guidance also talks about particularly about kind of crowd control around entrances and exits and toilets and kind of corridors. And whilst we're not legally requiring people to remain physically distanced, when people do remain physically distanced, it does actually reduce the risk of the transmission of COVID. So the 50% of capacity is no more than a kind of a planning tool to think about how, when you're thinking about events, when you're thinking about nightclubs, one of the ways in which you could help keep people safer is by working on 50% of capacity. Now, we absolutely know and understand that that is not practical in all places. So, for example, in an indoor location, much harder to achieve. But if you're planning an outdoor event and you've got the ability to use more space for the same numbers of people, or to reduce the numbers of people, then we recommend that as good advice, because we want to keep those rates of transmission down as low as possible.
Okay. Questions are just going to keep coming in, and thank you for doing so, because it's important. And it's important to also say, Ruth, this is really the start of a 2-week consultation with the industry. Is that fair to say that the industry between now and the 14th can feed back and say, look, this is not working, this is working?
Well, so they really need to feedback before the 14th, because of course this will all be into effect on the 14th. So you know, if people have got comments or concerns about the guidance, then the best thing to do is to feedback to us during the course of next week, so that we can consider those comments in the round, and we've got time to do so.
Okay, Andrew sends in a question and said, it will be difficult to take contact details of all attendees for free open public events, such as the air display coming up in September, which are spread over a greater distance. Is there any way around this in such circumstances where for free open events such as the air display, you can not have that need, because it's going to be really difficult to get everyone's address details, is it not?
Yeah, and we appreciate that. So the nature of some events where you don't have a kind of an entry and an exit point, it becomes now impossible to do. So what we've done is we've deliberately written the legislation so that we don't criminalise people attending events where there are no entry and exit points, and it kind of becomes a logistical nightmare. But what we do want to do is where people are organising those large free events, where there are particular challenges around the gathering of contact details, we do want to engage with those event organisers, either through the bailiffs panel or in advance of that, to talk to them about what we can do and what is realistic.
Yeah, talking about realistic, I mean, there's a comment already saying 50% capacity is just not financially viable to operate that business. You get that?
Yeah, and we understand that, which is why it's not legislation, which is why we're saying it's a planning tool to help you think about how you can reduce crowding. And in some locations, it's absolutely unviable. We know that. In other situations, it actually isn't unviable, and it could potentially be helpful and possible to deliver.
Okay, so there's best practice, and then it comes on a sliding scale to where best practice and viability meet. If a family attends a large event, would all details be required, even for those who are under, I don't know what underage means, but does it under 16 or under 18?
Well, yeah, so,
Under 12.
as it stands at the moment, the law requires anybody over the age of 12 to provide their contact details, and the law requires everybody over the age of 12 to provide their contact details. It isn't just one lead group member.
Yeah, a couple of questions coming in, if you like, on the principle, and they're coming from two sides. Someone says, why take these measures if there's no COVID in the community? And Tim says, can you explain the rationale with regard to collecting contact details if cases are only being picked up at the ports and not in the community?
Okay. So it's not quite correct to make the statement that there is no COVID in the community. We do know that there's and it's a very, very small number, but we do know that there is COVID in the community at the moment. And what we also know is that the cases that we know about are those that have those that we have identified. You know, I'm sure that everyone will appreciate that there is it's not even a possibility, there is a probability that there may be people out there with COVID who we haven't identified because they're asymptomatic and because they do not feel unwell, and therefore haven't come forward for testing. So we know that there is COVID out there at the moment. We know that our borders are open. We know that whilst we have controls in place at our borders, no control is foolproof. So we know that there is always the potential for some increases in community transmission.
Right. Okay. So the risk is low, but there is still a risk.
The risk is still there, and I think that that's really important for people to understand. The risk is still there, and we saw this back at the end of last year, where we had gone through a period where it had virtually no cases, and we kind of thought that we cracked it, and then we suddenly got that second wave. There is always the possibility of a third wave.
Okay. Questions? Jackie says, while the draft suggests masks to be worn between staff and customers, and the recommendation is to maintain 1 meter where necessary, what is the situation with people seated at an event, not the same family unit, i.e. should there be 1 meter still maintained and spaced between each group? So different family groups, 1 meter spaced between them?
So the from a public health perspective, and I'm sure that everyone will understand that what we are dealing with is risk and risk management. So from a public health perspective, it's absolutely the case that if family groups are distanced from each other, that reduces the risk. We're not making it law because we know it's very difficult to place a legal requirement on people to stay 1 meter apart, and also given the low rates of transmission and the high rates of vaccination, it is also an unnecessary measure to provide for in legislation. But it remains the case that if someone attends your event and that person has COVID, there is less likelihood of them transmitting it to other people if they are a distance from those other people. Furthermore, the way that contact tracing works, it is still the case that you would be named a close contact if you were less than 2 meters apart for more than 15 minutes. So it's not just about protecting your staff and your customers from possible COVID. It's also about reducing the chances of your staff and your customers being in self-isolation as a result of being named a close contact. Because you want your customers out and about, because that's the way we all make our money. We don't want them in self-isolation.
Okay. What about vaccinated persons? And I'm treading very carefully with this. If people have been vaccinated, and there's a high percentage in Jersey now who have been first and second jabbed already, do they or could they be in a better position and less immune? And if that's the case, wouldn't that mean that, you know, if people can show they're double jabbed, could they be in a, I'm thinking of a large event here, could they be in a different enclosure? Could they be in a different protected state than people who have not? We're getting into a moral argument about whether you should be forced to have a jab or not. I don't really want to go down that road, but it's a worthwhile thing to explore.
So the competent authority ministers and public health officials have given a lot of consideration to vaccination status and to differences of treatment around vaccination status. There are some very, very significant ethical issues around that, and also some very significant legal issues around that at the moment. So as it stands, vaccination status and being vaccinated is not a gateway to different permissions or doesn't allow different forms of access. The only place at which vaccination status becomes relevant is in the decisions that are made at the border as to the level of risk you may present as an individual with regards to the transmission of COVID and the and whether or not you need to self-isolate. So you're just going to have to excuse, there's going to be some fussing in the background because my daughter's plugging in my power lead. So please excuse any background noise.
A power lead is always a good thing. I always think that's an essential. That's an essential, and I'm glad you've got the technical help that you require. But look at that. That's just brilliant. Whilst we're talking about that, I don't want you to get into the world of opinion because what you're dealing with here is policy and fact.
Yeah.
But do you think there will be a time when we get to learn to live with COVID? And are we getting to that stage?
Oh, without a doubt, we are in a really different place from where we were this time last year or where we were when we started to get that second wave in the autumn. Vaccination is changing the game, and COVID will never be flu. It's a different thing, but there will come a point in time, or at least everyone is hopeful and envisages that there will come a point in time whereby we have learned to live with COVID and it is just part of our day-to-day existence. And we won't need to necessarily behave in different ways as a result of COVID. But, you know, part of that is about variants as well. So there are some unknowns.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. It's 11:25, just gone. It's Murray Norton with you here for the Chamber of Commerce. And this is the Chamber of Commerce web chat with Ruth Johnson, Head of Policy for Government of Jersey, on the start of the conversation in the next 2 weeks as we lead towards the 14th of June and stage 7. Questions coming in. Polly, hello Polly, put a question in nice and early and we've just got to it now. Will the numbers increase for weddings at private houses?
Yes. So at stage 7, one of the things that we're doing is there is a piece of legislation at the moment called the Gatherings Control Order. And that is the legislation that places legal controls on the numbers of people who can gather in homes and gardens. That order will disappear on the 14th. So there will no longer be any limits on the number of people in private homes and gardens, including for weddings.
Presumably contact tracing will remain there.
Contact tracing will remain.
Excellent. Just want to keep emphasising that. And Polly also asks, will you be able to have standing drinks receptions at weddings?
Yeah, you'll be able to have on the 7th, standing drinking resumes across the board. So you'll be able to do it at weddings, you'll be able to do it in pubs, you'll be able to do it in nightclubs. So back to being able to stand up and drink your pint.
And when you say the 7th, you mean the 7th stage, not the 7th of June.
Sorry. Yes.
All right. It's all right. I just don't want anyone misled. And in fact, if anybody does have any questions or actually wants to get in touch with you, we're very happy to be that conduit. And they just drop us a line here at Chamber of Commerce, and we'll feed these through to you, and all of these questions as well, just so you get a sense of the feeling that is coming on there. Question coming in: would a visiting artist, these are events companies, would a visiting artist arriving on the day of the performance need to isolate before they get their test result? This might cause an issue with the event program, which could cause unrest at the event if there's a delay and big star cannot be on stage because they're still waiting for. How does that work? So
as you will be aware, we've made some changes to our controls at the border as it stands at the moment. If you are double vaccinated, if your artists coming in are double vaccinated, they will need to be tested at the border, but they will not need to self-isolate whilst they wait for that test result. Now, if you're coming in from a green area and you're not double vaccinated, you need to have a day 0 test, and there are then some self-isolation requirements that apply. The challenge that there will always be with incoming artists is that it will depend where they're flying in from, and it will depend on whether that is from a green, an amber or a red zone, because that will change the vaccination, that will change the isolation requirements, and those things are not static. So as COVID transmission rates increase and decrease in other jurisdictions, we will see those red, green and amber areas change in other jurisdictions as well. So there is no simple and easy answer to that one, I'm afraid.
But if they've been double jabbed, they're coming in even from a green area, they're going to get tested on arrival, and they should allow for up to 6 hours to get their results, although they are turning around much quicker.
Yes, yeah. You know, at the moment, we're turning the results around quickly. However, during peak periods of travel, it is possible that that time frame will become longer, as it did, for example, over last summer.
Okay. Someone who's obviously just joined us said this may have been covered, but will 1 metre social distancing be removed from the pubs and restaurants?
So 1 metre social distancing is not legislation. It's a recommendation. It still stands as a recommendation. We know that in lots of places it's not being complied with, and it won't be complied with, but it goes back to that fact. If you can do it, it's just good common sense. And not just for business owners, it's actually common sense for members of the public to try to keep a sensible distance from other people.
Love a good Q&A, and this is one of them. Jackie is back on the Q&A, saying, on the subject of artists, or for that matter, contractors who are coming over to the island, what happens if they are sat next to a positive case on the plane and boat? Will they have to isolate even if their vaccination and have tested, they have a vaccination and they've tested negative?
So if you are named a close contact as a result of sitting next to someone on the airplane, you will need to self-isolate. And as it stands at the moment, vaccination status is not part of that. That may potentially change in future, but at the moment, you would be caught by the self-isolation requirements.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so perhaps something to look at in terms of thought process as we go down the line of vaccination. But thank you, Jackie, for that question. Probably not the answer you were seeking, but it's certainly the answer that you've got. Mike, many people in the industry have suggested that testing should be conducted at the point of departure rather than once they arrive in the island. Lateral flow tests have got cheaper, and that is that what's happening here at the moment? Question mark. And what is happening here at the moment with lateral flow testing? So a comment first about point of departure rather than arrival, and the second one on lateral flow testing.
Okay, so there are quite a few, there are a number of jurisdictions that don't test on arrival. What they do is they require pre-departure testing. We have spent an incredible amount of time looking at and reviewing our border controls. And there are pros and cons to whichever way you go about doing these things. The reality is that their pre-departure testing, because it's usually conducted 72 hours in advance, provides for an opportunity for a person who has a negative test to actually be COVID positive and to arrive on the island. If we then don't test them on arrival in the island, we're actually creating a point of risk. And one of the things that we have been fortunate about, and I absolutely appreciate that people working in the industry won't necessarily have benefited from this because of the remaining controls on their industry. But, you know, Jersey has been open for a lot longer, and kind of our lives have been a lot freer than in many other jurisdictions. And that has been in part because of our continued control at our borders, because that seeding risk through the borders is absolutely fundamental to what future transmission looks like.
Okay, lateral flow tests, they've got cheaper. Are we considering them? Are we using them? Are they right?
Yeah, we are using lateral flow tests, lateral flow devices. So the schools testing program has been based around lateral flow devices, and we are also rolling out pilots of use of lateral flow devices in different parts of industry at the moment. What we haven't done as of yet is do what the UK has been doing, which is about allowing individual citizens to pick up lateral flow devices and to use them at home. And the reason that we haven't done that as of this at the moment is because there's lots of evidence about how self-used unsupervised lateral flow devices can actually potentially lead to quite a lot of false results, so that they can indicate that people don't have COVID when they do, or the other way around, which of course has a massive impact on the individual. So for the time being, we're not distributing them for home use, but yes, we are using them as part of schools and workforce testing.
Yeah, the workforce testing actually is something that we both have discussed in the past, and certainly is something that we've introduced a few businesses to. Are you still looking for businesses to do pilots, or is that underway at the moment?
So the pilots are rolling at the moment, but it is absolutely the case that depending on what those look like, we will be looking to work with other sectors of industry around use of lateral flow devices and you know, for staff. And of course, we do have the workforce testing program. And if any of your staff fall within the criteria of the workforce testing program, we cannot reiterate enough, use that testing service because it protects your staff and it protects your customers.
Excellent. All right. James has been in touch, and again, we're going over some old ground, but forgive us for doing so because I think it's important that the understanding gets out into the industry. From the 14th of June, asks James, will guests and attendees be able to move freely around events and weddings and not have to remain seated?
They can move freely around. Mingling is allowed from the 14th.
There we go. What day is the 14th? Is it a Monday? Because if it is, it's great. That's Mingling Monday. I mean, you know, we've already named it here and now. Mingling Monday will happen. Thank you, James, for your question, and thanks very much indeed for joining us today. Andrew says, I hope this doesn't happen, but if legal restrictions were to be reintroduced due to an increase in cases and the attendance numbers are restricted as stated, we need to have guidance on what these numbers will be if we are to prepare suitable contingency plans. So these are the ifs and buts, but if you're planning an event now, you'll need to know what your contingencies will be. And there's a second part. We also need to assess if the contingency plans will make something financially viable. Without the numbers, we're just reacting, but we need to be proactive with our planning. That's quite a sensible way forward, isn't it?
It is really difficult, and there are particular issues and challenges around the events industry because you have to plan so far in advance. And one of the things that we've learned in the last 16-18 months is the future is an unsure thing, and it changes on a weekly basis. So in the event that there was to be a significant increase of transmission on island, whereby it was felt that it posed a risk to people's health, we would start to look at reimposing controls. So we'll be back in the place where we were kind of in the second wave in autumn of last year. And where we impose those controls, it will be on the high risk activities first of all. So we would be likely first of all to reimpose controls and gatherings in people's homes and gardens, because we know, and there's evidence, that private homes and gardens are places where increased transmission looks likely. And we would be likely to reimpose controls on certain types of activity. So, for example, it is possible that we would restrict stand-up drinking and return to table service only. And it is also possible that we would impose the controls that we previously had on dancing and on live music. With regard to the controls on numbers, those are always slightly more problematic because it depends on the nature of the activity that people are indulging in. So, for example, 1,000 people spread out over a large venue does not pose as much risk as 100 people in a small tight venue, because it's about distance. So it's very difficult for us to be definitive about numbers, because the numbers game relates to the distancing between people. So at this stage, we are not saying, and we don't feel that we're able to say, if there was an increase in transmission, we would limit a nightclub to X number of people or an event to X number of people. But what we are probably more certain about is that if there was an increase in transmission, we would start to say table service only and limit those controls within homes, and potentially reintroduce as well the requirement to wear masks. So not necessarily looking to control numbers, possibility, but for that, looking to control activities and how people interact with each other.
Complicated old affair, isn't it? But thank you, Andrew, for the question. A question coming in says, what's the difference between the risk at a free event and between a ticketed event? I'm sure you're going to say there's no difference. They're both risks. But when it comes to collating contact details, why would you not collate contact details at a free event, but you would at a ticketed event? Is that about the practicality of the ticketed event?
So the ticketed event is perfect for the collection of contact details, because what it is, if you take contact details on the purchase of a ticket. So ticketed events make it a lot easier to collect contact details. And with regard to free events, we still want contact details collected wherever possible. We are not imposing legal controls on some form of free events because of the difficulty about it. We talked about the example earlier of the air show. Well, how do you go about doing that if you don't have an entry and an exit point? But if it's a free event, for example, the Portuguese Food Festival would be an example of that, where there is an entry point, we will be saying to industry, we want you to think about how you collect those contact details at entry and exit, at entry points for the free events, not just for ticketed events.
Yeah, Okay. Well, there's more coming up on events, as you might think from the questions that we've got at the moment. We've got 19 minutes left. You've got a question that you feel has not been asked yet, and you need an answer to it now. This is what we're here for at the Chamber of Commerce, and this is what Ruth is here for now. The Q&A box, we'll get through as many as we can in the last run. James says, in relation to catering, from the 14th of June, can sharing boards and buffet and canapes resume, or does food need to remain plated and individually portioned?
Oh, that's a very good question.
Isn't it?
I need to come back on that one because we're just starting to work on the guidance. We haven't got down to that level of detail, but what we can do is we can make sure that we consider that, and we do so in the very near future, and get back to you on that one.
Okay, get back to you on that one, James, and we'll keep you in touch on that. As soon as Ruth and the team know, we'll let you know. Beverly says, I fully appreciate the care and attention that has been taken care with all of this, and I just wanted to say thank you, which is good. May we return to the situation where a double vaccinated negative day one artist or speaker who sits next to someone on a plane with a positive result, when they get a double vaccination, will they be given exemption? So it's going back to what we were saying before. If someone was double jabbed and they were an artist or a speaker or a contractor coming to the island, sat next to someone on the plane or on the boat, or and they, by association of sitting close to them, have to isolate, will there come a point where that vaccinated person can be exempt from that?
Possibly. So the vaccinated person who's sitting on the plane will come through our borders, and because they're vaccinated, they won't need to self-isolate at the border. But what happens is they're then out in the community, because it will take, it takes time for us to catch up and to contact trace people. So the double vaccinated person is caught up within the standard policy and rules around contact tracing. And the reality is that if you are close to someone who has COVID, your chances of getting COVID are significantly higher than in kind of any other situation. So the main way that we get COVID is because we've been close to someone with COVID. And one of the things that we know about vaccinated people is that vaccination stops people getting ill or stops people getting seriously ill. It doesn't stop people getting COVID, and it doesn't stop people transmitting COVID to others. So for the time being, the purposes of contact tracing, you have to self-isolate regardless of whether or not you're vaccinated. You may still have COVID and you may still transmit it to others, even though you're not ill from it.
Okay, comment on outdoor events, large ones, even small ones, pay large amounts of money as deposits to secure artists, the infrastructure, the staging. We know this. If an event is told it cannot go to ahead due to a huge raise in numbers, will the government compensate the event costs? If not, the prediction is the industry could collapse overnight due to having already suffered for 15 months. I know you get that. And actually, we talked before this program started about financial compensation and actually co-funding. And if a business was to run at 50% of its capacity, would some form of funding still remain? Now, not your department as such, but that doesn't help us too much. But just so we know how these things work, where does that sit and where does that decision making come to?
So any decisions about whether or not the government of Jersey was going to underwrite events in the event that they need to be cancelled because we government say that it's necessary to reimpose controls, they sit with the Economic Development Minister. And as it stands at the moment, there is no decision about the underwriting of events. But what the Economic Development Minister and his team are looking at and considering matters relating to that, and we will make sure that the industry is informed of what is or isn't going to happen before Reconnection on the 14th.
Right. Fine. Incidentally, there's a comment that says COVID insurance is not an option as cover for these sort of events. So again, I think this is something that if the island wants events to happen and the government wishes to support these in the case of, then there is an opportunity there for some discussion to happen. But it's not a discussion with you. Right.
Not.
You've ducked that one. Barry has been in touch. Hello, Barry. He said, if any amount of people can meet and mingle at an indoor wedding or at a household party without any advised social distancing, I'm not sure that's true, but I'm sure you'll come back to us at the moment. But if you're saying without any advised social distancing, then why are nightclubs being advised to reduce capacity to 50% and ensure that people are 1 to 2 meters spaced apart per person based on the venue size? Question mark.
Mingling is allowed. Mingling is allowed in private homes, in weddings. Mingling is allowed in nightclubs. We are advising everywhere, regardless of whether it's in a private home, regardless of whether it's in a marquee in your garden, regardless if it's in a nightclub, that you try to socially distance and you support people to socially distance. So if you are, for example, organising an event in a private home, catering for an event in a private home, in a marquee, we want you to think about how you can support those guests to socially distance by, for example, working with the people who are organising that wedding to get a bigger marquee so that there's more space around it. It's absolutely the case that in all situations, it doesn't matter where, we are saying business owners and members of the public, whilst it's not against the law to be closer than 1 or 2 meters, we still recommend it and we still encourage it, and we want to think about how we want businesses to think about how they support people to do it.
Okay, Barry, thank you for the question. Ruth, thank you for the answer. The comment from someone coming in saying free events are possibly more risky. I think it was from my quip. Free events are possibly more risky than if there are no designated entry points. So I think they're saying that free events probably could be more risky. But again, your messaging is whether it's a free event or a ticketed event, try and observe some distancing if you can, whilst it's not the law.
Absolutely, and you know, get those contacted. Work with us to consider how we can get the contact details.
Okay. Mike asks, as someone in hospitality, wearing masks is probably, for Mike anyway, the most onerous of all of the requirements. Actually, I lose my perspective wearing a mask. I can't find things. I don't know why. It's over my mouth and nose, but I still can't see things as clearly. When will the government publish the scientific research on the subject that the government has considered? There are many studies that suggest that basic masks neither prevent transmission nor protect the user. Where do we stand on masks?
Okay, so where we stand on masks is that the bombs 37 and 14 masks will not be required in any limited number of environments. We are still waiting for the scientific and technical advice from our scientific and technical committee. And what we are anticipating, but we don't know this yet because the advice is still forthcoming, is that masks will still be required in healthcare settings, in buses, in transports, and in semi-close contact services. We are not anticipating that masks will still be required in shops, restaurants, cafes, as a matter of law. Still recommended, but not a matter of law. So that is what we are envisaging is going to happen. But we are, but the scientific and technical committee will not be making, will not be presenting the Council of Ministers, the competent authority ministers with final advice until next week. So there's slight uncertainty around masks as it stands at the moment. With regard to the scientific evidence, there is scientific evidence that's currently available through the Government of Jersey website, which we can reissue via Murray if people would think that that was helpful. And the evidence is that masks do help prevent transmission. They're the right sort of masks, worn in the right way. They do prevent transmission. We appreciate that there's texts out there, studies out there, which suggest otherwise, but they are usually not scientifically robust, and they are not accepted as being scientifically robust and as good evidence. Can't hear you, Moe.
Yep, that would be my fault. There was a bit of noise going on in the background. I muted my own mic. Could visiting artists apply for an exemption of isolation if they have a test to alleviate the issue of delay to their performance on the day? We're getting into the nuance here, but maybe things to consider, as they would only be visiting for work purposes. And we know people that have to visit for work purposes. And need to be in a place at a time. Is there any form of exemption from isolation that could be built in to make these events go ahead?
So it is possible to apply for exemptions, and it's a really good point about visiting artists. What I will do is I will go away and speak to the people responsible for the exemptions, actually think through the issue of visiting artists and how that works, and we will get back to you and we will let you know.
Okay, all right. Well, you know, it's good that these and this is why the industry is so important, because they know this detail inside out and they live it day in, day out. And I think just by raising these things, maybe we can get something sorted. But thank you for the question. It's helpful, and we'll relay back on that, as we will do with sharing platters and buffets and canapes. With almost the entire island fully vaccinated, what else is expected of islanders to allow businesses to operate normally? And I hate saying this, like Guernsey. So not the first time you'll have heard the like Guernsey comparison, but what's the answer?
So what else is what else do we need to do to make for the island to operate? So what we need to do is we just need to all of us take responsibility for trying to keep those rates of transmission low. So, you know, we're publishing guidance. You've seen that guidance in draft. It is guidance, with the exception of the bits around contact details. It's not law, and none of you as business owners will be breaking the law if you don't work within the guidance. However, if you don't work within the guidance, you will be potentially increasing the risk of transmission, and that will mean the reimposement of controls. The way in which we continue the journey we're on, and we're doing really well at the moment, and the way in which we continue to do that is actually all of us taking responsibility for us to physically distance, to ensure that there's good ventilation around us, and to help take sensible measures to stop transmission.
Time for a quick question if someone wants to type it very, very quickly, because we're 5 minutes to the hour and our time is almost up on what has been a very helpful Q&A, I'm sure, for the industry. I think the industry, and we said this right at the start, are probably seeing, whilst are very, very keen to open and very, very keen to do what they can, and they will see the restrictions or at least guidance recommendations that are down there. I think the message I'm getting is that there is a lot more freedom than perhaps some first considered would be, that this is not law. You know, can we look forward to the 14th with positivity that this is the way forward?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, what's happening on the 14th is a really significant step forward. You know, we are going to be able to go out as citizens. We are going to be able to stand up and we're going to be able to drink. We're going to be able to go to nightclubs. We're going to be able to go to events. There's not going to be any controls on the numbers of people there. All we're doing is saying this is a significant step forward. It does generate risk. So please do all you can as business owners to help mitigate that risk, because it's good for everyone.
Excellent. Can we have seating at the bar?
You can, yeah.
Yeah. There you go. That was a very short question, but a very, very short answer to go with it as well, which is excellent. We have pretty much run out of time. If people want to get in touch with us, it's pretty easy. We're at the Chamber of Commerce and we're in dialogue with you. Oh, question just in. Will autumn and winter be something to be concerned about? I don't know how your crystal ball is, but is that something to worry about?
Well, so it's not that good. No one's crystal ball is that hot at the moment, but what we do know is COVID is a respiratory virus, and we know that respiratory viruses always increase in the autumn and the winter. That's the case for every single respiratory virus. So the opening of the continued relaxation of controls creates potential risk of increased transmission. If there is increased transmission, logic dictates that risk increases in autumn and winter. But that's the case with every single virus. It's the case every year with flu.
So there's the caveat to that. They know how to get in touch with us, which is what they were just saying. The questions are still coming in. So if a person is vaxxed, the autumn and winter could be easier to deal with? Certainly be easier than when we weren't vaxxed.
Yeah, absolutely. Vaccination, vaccination is the key to this. But the key to it is everyone being vaccinated. So people in Jersey being vaccinated, and also all the visitors and everyone else coming in. But vaccination is the world's way out of this, right? Not just Jersey's.
Okay. Listen, we're almost out of time. As I said, they know how to get in touch with us with the Chamber of Commerce, and we're providing this information for this sector, and they can reach out to me at murray.norton@jerseychamber.com. Presumably there are government contacts that they can head for as well. We don't need your email address right now, Ruth, but is there a department, is there a reach, or is there something online they can go to?
So the best thing to do is to email workplacecovid@gov.je, and that goes through to some of our enforcement officers. And if they don't know the answers, they know exactly who to get the answers from.
Okay, workplacecovid@gov.je is that. In relationship, I'm getting another question in quickly. In relationship to outside catering, when will the detailed guidance in relation to what we can and cannot do in relation to food and drinks be available? So that's something you're going to take away now, and
we'll come back, and it will certainly be available. If not during the course of next week, it will certainly be available before we move to the 14th.
Hey, we've had 38 questions in 1 hour. That's pretty good going. We should do this again, Ruth. It's very, very useful and it's very helpful to the industry. Thank you for your time today and for giving us the information that you've given. The draft guidance we have, and if anyone needs a copy of that, they can get in touch with us and we'll make sure that it's passed on so they can pore over it. And if they've got any questions, do come back to us. It's been a Chamber of Commerce web chat with Ruth Johnson, Head of Policy for the Government of Jersey, and me, Murray Norton. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, and we look forward to joining you on the next one. Until then, have a good day. Thanks, Ruth. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.